Welcome back to our channel. The 1970s were a time of intense transition for the United States. Inflation rippled across the economy, industries adapted to new technological standards, and the U.S. Mint maintained its critical role in the nation's financial machinery. In 1977, as the country continued its post-Vietnam evolution, millions of Roosevelt dimes flowed from the presses of the Philadelphia and Denver mints. The design was well worn by then. Roosevelt's left-facing portrait on the obverse, the familiar torch flanked by olive and oak branches on the reverse. It was a coin that the average American never gave a second thought to. But that same year, beneath the regularity and routine, something slipped through the cracks, an unnoticed anomaly born not of sabotage, but of silence and overlooked seconds. At first glance, a 1977 Roosevelt dime looked like any other. But for a rare few, there were signs, slight, nearly imperceptible deviations. The thickness wasn't quite right. The weight was off by fractions of a gram. Edges that should have been cleanly reeded were partially smooth or shallow. These weren't glaring mistakes. They were whispers, mistakes made not in loud misstrikes but in quiet moments of mechanical fatigue or procedural lapse. A few collectors had long suspected that 1977 held more than met the eye, but without evidence. It was just theory. Years later, tucked away in a forgotten drawer of a wooden desk in Iowa, a man named Charlie Higgins rediscovered an old coin jar he had inherited from his father. Among the war nickels and wheat pennies was a 1977 dime that felt unusual in his hand. Charlie, a retired postal worker with a hobbyist's eye for detail, noticed something strange the moment he held it up to the light. The color was more silvery than he expected, almost too clean for a coin of its age. The edge lacked the telltale copper stripe of a clad dime. He turned it. The reading was shallow and irregular. He weighed it. It came in at just over 2 grams, light for a modern dime, but not by enough to scream counterfeit. Intrigued, Charlie brought it to a local coin show, where a dealer with a handheld scope took a closer look. The dealer furrowed his brow. The 1977 date appeared slightly rotated in relation to the rim. The Liberty inscription was slightly off-center. The reverse struck him even more. The lettering on United States of America had inconsistent depth, and the torch's flame appeared slightly misaligned. The coin didn't appear worn. It appeared incorrectly made. The dealer suggested a submission to a grading service. Charlie complied, curious but not expectant. Weeks passed. The response, when it came, was startling. The coin was verified as a 1977 Roosevelt dime struck on a transitional planchet, likely a leftover or test blank not intended for circulation. The composition was atypical, with higher nickel content than standard and a possible absence of copper layering. The coin was authentic, and the error was real. Charlie now owned a legitimate mint mistake that had gone unnoticed for decades. News of the find rippled through the numismatic community. Other collectors began examining their 1977 dimes more closely. At least 2 others emerged over the next 3 years, one with nearly complete missing edge reading, another with visible die clash and an unusually bright surface due to the unexpected metal composition. Each coin shared subtle, silent traits: underweight, off-strike, and somehow, impossibly, different theories began to form. Some speculated that transitional blanks from a discontinued foreign coinage contract had been fed into the mint systems. Others believed that experimental planchets, intended for testing or calibration, were mistakenly used during live production. There was no formal admission from the mint, of course. There never is. But the coins existed, authenticated and verified, and that was proof enough for collectors. Once the market recognized the scarcity and origin of these anomalies, prices rose steadily. An initial auction in 2017 saw a lightly circulated 1977 error dime sell for $18,000. Another, graded -55 Australian dollars with unusually clean edges and a nearly flawless reverse, fetched $34,000 less than a year later. But it was in 2021 when the coin's reputation truly broke through. A near-mint example with verified off-metal composition and double die features stunned bidders at a national auction and sold for $52,000, well beyond the pre-auction estimate. From there, the coin's trajectory was all but inevitable. As more collectors scrambled to uncover potential matches in their own stashes, competition surged. One particular specimen, held in a private collection for over a decade before finally being graded, commanded $128,000 in a 2023 sale, a record for a Roosevelt dime era from that era. The story of the 1977 dime isn't loud. It doesn't come with flashy design changes or dramatic misalignments. Its brilliance lies in the subtlety of its flaw, the quiet, almost unnoticeable slip that turned a simple coin into a cornerstone of modern US-era collecting. And today, what was once dismissed as just another 10-cent piece is recognized as a numismatic jewel, its value ranging from $52,000 to $128,000, depending on condition and clarity of its mysterious deviation. A silent error, hidden in plain sight, now treasured beyond its original intent. In 1984, the rhythm of the U.S. Mint beat steadily, pressing millions of coins into existence. Among them was the humble Roosevelt dime, a coin whose design had become so familiar that most Americans passed it without a second glance. The nation was in the midst of technological shifts and cultural changes, but within the massive presses of the Mint, consistency was the law. The Roosevelt dime had remained virtually unchanged since its inception in 1946, and the 1984 run was meant to be no different. It was supposed to be just another year, just another coin, routine, predictable, unremarkable. Except something didn't go quite according to plan. It began with a whisper on a coin forum in the early 2000s. A collector from Ohio posted a blurry image of a 1984 dime that seemed odd. Not misshapen or damaged, just off. The torch on the reverse lacked clarity. The lettering appeared thicker than usual, almost swollen. More interestingly, Roosevelt's profile on the obverse showed unusual doubling around the eyes and mouth. The collector hadn't thought much of it. He'd pulled the dime from circulation, tossed it in a jar, and only revisited it years later while sorting through old change. But the picture drew attention. Another user chimed in, claiming he had found something similar in a roll he'd picked up at a bank in Michigan. Then another from Arizona. The signs were always subtle, doubling on Roosevelt's features, misalignment near the date, edges that were either faintly reeded or partially smooth. It wasn't enough to convince skeptics. But to those who knew how to listen to the silence in coins, it was the beginning of something worth chasing. When a professional grader finally got their hands on one of these oddities, the story became more than just rumor. The coin exhibited signs of a rare mint error, mechanical doubling paired with a misaligned die strike. Under magnification, it was clear that the error wasn't the result of post-mint damage. The ghost-like doubling on the obverse, the off-center pressure that subtly pushed the design outward, the weak rim, all pointed toward an origin deep within the minting process. This was no ordinary 1984 dime. The oddities didn't stop there. One particular example submitted in 2010 weighed slightly more than expected. It was only off by a fraction of a gram, but it raised eyebrows. Metallurgical testing revealed a faint variance in composition, still within the bounds of what was acceptable for US-clad coinage, but odd enough to warrant questions. Had the Mint used leftover planchets from a foreign contract? Or perhaps introduced test materials without record? There was no definitive answer. The Mint, as usual, offered no public explanation. The collector community responded in waves. Some dismissed the error as minor. Others began hunting, sifting through bags and rolls from 1984, hoping for that strange doubling, that ghosted profile, that unexpected texture. A few were rewarded. A collector in Oregon found a 1984 dime with clear die clash marks, showing the outline of the obverse bleeding faintly onto the reverse. Another discovered a specimen with Roosevelt's face distorted by an improperly seated planchet, his features stretched, melted looking under magnification. These errors weren't dramatic enough to be obvious to casual observers. That was part of their mystique. They required patience, knowledge, and a willingness to believe that something extraordinary could hide within the ordinary. For those who found them, the reward was more than the coin itself. It was the thrill of uncovering what others had missed. As verified examples grew, so did their demand. At first, they sold modestly, small premiums over face value, then over melt value, and then into the hundreds. But once the first MS-66 specimen sold at auction for over $12,000 in 2015, the tone changed. Collectors realized they weren't just dealing with a few flukes. They were looking at a pattern, a quiet flaw that had slipped through undetected for decades. Prices escalated as higher-grade specimens entered the marketplace. One coin, preserved in near-perfect condition with pristine doubling and strong eye appeal, stunned bidders in 2019 by selling for $44,000. From there, the 1984 Reare dimes became legends whispered about in collector circles, debated over at coin shows, and sought after in every mixed roll. The market was no longer just curious, it was hungry, and in 2023, the crown jewel surfaced. A flawless 1984 Roosevelt dime, struck on an improperly mixed alloy planchet, featuring razor-sharp die clash marks and an unmistakable off-center strike, appeared in a major auction. Graded at MS-67 and authenticated as a high-grade mint error, it ignited a bidding war that pushed its final sale price to an astonishing $114,000. Today, that same dime, dismissed for decades as just another pocket filler, has become a symbol of what lies beneath the surface. A small, silvery disc passed from hand to hand, forgotten in drawers and lost in the folds of wallets, now transformed into a rare artifact of imperfection. A 1984 Roosevelt dime with a quiet secret and a silent legacy, carrying a value that ranges from $44,000 to $114,000, depending on its clarity, error type, and condition. A reminder that sometimes, the most valuable stories are the ones we never meant to tell. In 2015, as the U.S. Mint maintained its tireless rhythm, pressing millions of Roosevelt dimes into existence, few could have imagined that among the near-flawless sea of uniformity, a handful of outliers would quietly slip through undetected. The year was uneventful in numismatic circles when it came to the dime: no redesigns, no new metal compositions, no dramatic announcements. Just another year of ordinary dimes doing their ordinary work. But in the quiet churn of production, an unexpected flaw emerged. It wasn't obvious or showy. It wasn't something one would spot casually on a coffee shop counter. It was the kind of error that could live among pocket change unnoticed for years, waiting patiently to be discovered by someone who actually looked. That someone was a young coin enthusiast named Liam, who stumbled across his first oddity not in a bankroll or antique shop, but in the tip jar at the cafe where he worked. During a slow Tuesday shift, while counting out change to balance the drawer, a dime caught his eye. It was the color at first, shinier than the rest. But when he flipped it, something felt off. The reverse design, with its familiar torch flanked by oak and olive branches, seemed slightly shifted. The outer edge wasn't as crisply defined as it should have been. And when he ran a thumb across the rim, he noticed the edge was unusually smooth, missing most of the reeded texture a dime is supposed to have. Curious, he placed it aside. That evening, at home under a desk lamp, he examined it with a cheap magnifying glass. The inscriptions were blurry. The word "Liberty" on the obverse appeared bloated, as if it had been stretched. Roosevelt's profile had ghost-like doubling near the chin and eyes. It didn't look damaged, it looked wrong from the beginning. A few internet searches later and Liam began to suspect he had something more than just worn change. He took the dime to a local coin shop where the owner, a seasoned collector with decades of experience, examined it closely. The man didn't speak for a moment. Then, gently placing the coin on a felt pad, he said, "I think you've got a die adjustment strike, or maybe something stranger." The coin's features indicated that it hadn't been struck with full pressure, possibly due to the mint calibrating equipment on the fly. But what made it truly special was the subtle off-center strike and the absence of the normal clad edge. The weight, slightly under 2.2 grams, confirmed it. This coin might not have been struck on a proper dime planchet at all. Word of the find spread slowly. Collectors online debated the coin's nature. Some claimed it was struck on a foreign blank, others argued it was a mint calibration piece that accidentally made it into circulation. The U.S. Mint never issued a formal comment. But as more examples were found, 2 in Pennsylvania, 1 in New Mexico, and another in Kentucky, the mystery deepened. Each one showed similar features: weak edge reading, ghosted or doubled lettering, off-center details, and surfaces that lacked the typical brilliance of freshly minted dimes. It became clear that the 2015 Roosevelt dime had suffered from more than one type of production anomaly. One coin was found with clear die clash marks, traces of the obverse and reverse dies striking each other without a planchet between them, leaving behind shadows of Roosevelt's face on the reverse. Another had a partial collar strike, where the metal spilled outward ever so slightly, giving the rim a misshapen appearance. These weren't spectacular errors on their own. But in a modern coin era where the mint's quality control is precise and error coins are scarce, their presence was like finding footprints in freshly poured concrete. Collectors grew excited. The scarcity of these errors combined with their subtlety made them particularly desirable. They weren't mistakes one could easily find, they required knowledge, luck, and a very close look. By 2019, certified examples began appearing in small auctions, fetching prices in the thousands. A particularly well-preserved piece with deep die clash impressions and full ghost doubling sold for $18,000. By 2021, another, flawless in detail and showing dramatic rim deformation, sold for $26,000. As the years passed, higher-grade examples began surfacing from private collections. Some were pulled from rolls and bags, held quietly by those who had sensed their importance but waited for the market to mature. In 2023, a rare specimen, showing full misalignment between obverse and reverse, exceptional luster, and perfectly preserved doubling, went to auction. Bidding opened cautiously but accelerated quickly as serious buyers stepped in. When the final gavel fell, the coin sold for $72,000, setting a new high watermark for a modern Roosevelt dime era. The 2015 Roosevelt dime is not famous because of some dramatic change in design or a commemorative purpose. It is famous because it wasn't supposed to be famous at all. Its value lies in its quiet contradiction, a coin meant to be flawless, but marked instead by subtle, hidden flaws that whisper of mechanical hiccups and overlooked seconds. Today, these dimes are part of a growing legacy of modern mint errors that challenge assumptions and demand attention. From the overlooked contents of a tip jar to the high stage of a numismatic auction, this small coin now stands among the elite. What once passed through dozens of hands unnoticed has been transformed into a treasure, with a current value ranging from $26,000 to $72,000, depending on grade, rarity of the error type, and surface quality. A coin born of imperfection, elevated by rarity, and remembered for what it was never meant to be.